The normal findings of a lung in a long axis type configuration. Superior rib to the left, inferior rib to the right. Notice that the ribs cast shadows posteriorly due to the inability of the sound waves to permeate the hard calcifications of the rib. We see the chest wall anteriorly, and note here the two layers of the pleura. And we see here the outer parietal pleura and the inner visceral pleura. Now, while I've depicted these as two separate layers, in reality on ultrasound examination they're seen as a single shimmering white line that moves back and forth as the patient breathes. And as the patient breathes, we can see white comet tails or linear lines, vertical lines coming off the pleura down deep into the lung. So that will be the normal finding of a lung on long axis configuration. Here's a nice ultrasound image showing a normal lung, and what we see here, we're in the long axis configuration, so the superior rib is to the left, inferior rib to the right. Chest wall anteriorly, and we see here the lung sliding, which is the opposition of the outer parietal and the inner visceral pleura, and we see the vertical comet tails coming off the back of the pleura. Thus, this is a completely normal exam, no pneumothorax. But note the location of the pleura deep to the ribs and that classic shimmering line back and forth as the patient takes a breath. Here we see more dramatic comet tails coming off the shimmering parietal and visceral pleura. In this patient, we see the comet tail shooting off the back, telling us that this lung is up and there's no pneumothorax. Looks like on bedside examination, let's take a look at a pictorial showing a pneumothorax in a long axis view. We see here that the parietal pleura is now split from the visceral pleura, which is attached to the lung, by a layer of air shown by the yellow. Here's an ultrasound image taken from a patient who was stabbed to the left chest and who had shortness of breath. What we see here is a long axis view of a pneumothorax. Let's take a look at the chest wall anteriorly, and right below that we see the parietal pleura. Here's another image of a pneumothorax in a long axis configuration, and we see here the chest wall anteriorly and the single white line which is the parietal pleura. Now this patient was acutely Here's a pictorial showing an interesting finding, the signature of an incomplete pneumothorax known as lead point. And what we see is an incomplete pneumothorax with air collecting to the superior aspect of the image to the left, thus splitting the parietal from the visceral layers and causing an absence of lung sliding superiorly. However, here's an ultrasound image showing the lead point, and what we see here is the lung sliding to the right, the area where the lung touches up against the chest wall, and to the left, the area of absence of lung sliding, telling you there that air has collected between the visceral and parietal layers.